Hey guys, tonight we continue once again. With smoke still ghosting the ridge and the conk's last tired breath folded into the grass, I walk away from the valley because the hands down there have chosen to stay and the story insists I carry its ember uphill. The fox mask taps my hip with a rhythm that feels like a reminder not to narrate myself into a corner. First joke muttered to keep the air from tightening. If the forest is giving performance notes, I would appreciate them in writing, and the bamboo answers with a single creak that says learn your lines or improvise politely. So I take the old road's vertebrae until it thins into deer track and then into intention. The ground soft, the sky rinsed pale, and dawn's chill fitting over my shoulders like a damp haori. I climb toward the seam the Ronin once pointed to, where two hills lean their brows together as if sharing gossip, and I think about how shrines and temples once shared more than boundaries, about Shinbutsu Shugo blending kami and Buddhas for centuries before Meiji pulled them apart with official scissors, an ordinary historical fact that still stings when you say it out loud. And I wonder if the forest remembers the marriage more than the divorce, because every moss stone here looks like a compromise someone made with weather and faith, not a decree. Second joke slips out before worry can set its luggage down. Note to self, couples therapy for deities probably books out months in advance. And the wind edits my punchline but lets the smile stay. A sound interrupts, wood knocked against wood in a steady clack clack, not drum, not horn, sharper. And I realize with that pleasant ache of recognition that somewhere a watcher is sounding hayashiji. The old fire wards clappers, two sticks warning neighbors to mind their flames. A quirky relic from towns where men walked night streets calling hai no yojin as if caution itself could be sung into doorframes. Here in the forest it becomes a metronome for breathing, and I borrow its beat until the path levels on a shoulder of rock where someone long ago stacked 3 flat stones into a rude altar the size of a lunchbox. There is a folded slip beneath the top stone, paper gone fox brown with age, ink faded to a bruise, and when I slide it free dust blooms. The kanji still legible enough to read a name and a promise, and the fox mask warms at my side like a palm, as if the paper had remembered the hand that wrote it. I bow and tuck it back because vows do not age well in pockets. The trees thin and a torii strides across the ridge ahead. Not bright shrine red but the gray of bones after rain. Its crossbeam canted like a tired shoulder, and stepping under it I feel the temperature drop in that deliberate way sacred thresholds manage, a polite shiver that says choose your words. Historians still debate where torii truly began, Indian gates repurposed, Chinese lines reimagined, or something that sprouted here from the soil of habit, and I like that the debate remains an open door, because walking through a certainty would feel less honest than walking through a question. I keep moving because hunger has resumed lobbying, and I bribe it with a sliver of sour root that tastes exactly like regret. Third joke squeezed between chews, 5 stars for ambience, 0 for cuisine, and even the cicadas pretend to cough to hide a laugh. The path tips into a basin where fog sits, heavy as old fleece, and the ground changes underfoot to springy mats of cedar needles. The air scented with resin that tightens the throat, and in the middle of that hush stands a post with paper sutras pasted so thick they have become bark, the surface rippled with the fingerprints of pilgrims who pressed their names into damp paste hoping gods like tactile lists. I touch the edge of one, careful, and remember how the storehouse on the ridge swallowed its ledgers without complaint, how numbers and seals turn to soil with almost joyful efficiency. And the thought unsettles me enough that I start speaking to the fog like a clerk soothing a customer, explaining that the records I carry now are breath and scars and the clack of invisible hayashiji, and that if the forest wants an audit, it will have to smell it on me. The fog answers with motion, silhouettes parting in the distance where the basin narrows. Not the pale procession from earlier nights, but a single figure bearing a pole from which hang paper streamers. The same ash-smeared robes I saw in the valley, the staff swinging gently, the person moving with the measured softness of someone practiced at not startling trees. I lift a hand and the figure pauses, then bows without closing the distance, as if honoring both greeting and boundary, and in that quiet bow a truth taps my ribs. This ascent is mine alone. This part of the story expects solitary verbs. I pass the figure with space to spare, and the staff's paper flickers like small white fish in lazy water. Behind me the clappers start up again, faint but insistent, and I let them set my cadence across a saddle of rock that opens like a page. To the left, the valley's scar still smoldering in the cool. To the right, a slope so green it looks newly invented. And ahead, a notch in the ridge where wind speaks in a different vowel, large and hollow, promising a bowl beyond. I think of the duel that refused blood, of lanterns that were moths with ambitions, of the bucket chain that turned heat into steam and steam into breath. And I realize the forest has been curating me for a room where explanations are expensive. Perhaps that is what the Ronin meant by the question changing with the listener. I crest the notch and the bowl appears, a high cirque cupped by black pines, floor carpeted with crushed mica that glitters like a spilled pocket of stars, and in the center stands a ring of stones waist-high, each carved shallowly with symbols I almost know, shadow maps of constellations, river strokes, crest fragments, an index cut into rock. It feels wrong to step inside and wrong to walk away. So I do the only courteous thing left. I circle once, palm grazing the cold grit, and speak 3 anchors to keep myself from floating off the page. That Edo's piece-built roads that taught people how to arrive. That Meiji's scissors cut syncretic threads without asking if the cloth would fray. That Hayashiji once stitched night neighborhoods together with sound. The ring hums in the wind's vowel a hair louder, and my skin remembers the drum ground from earlier nights, the way rhythm became terrain, and something unclenches in me because I understand at last that the forest question is not why did you come but how will you leave. In pieces, in silence, with a name, with a story, and the answer is not an answer, it is a posture, a readiness to match breath to weather and courtesy to fear. I set the fox mask on the glittering floor, bow to it the way you bow to a partner before a dance, and promise aloud to pay with narrative before I pay with anything harder. The wind approves by moving only enough to lift a corner of fog from the far ridge, a glimpse of a darker mouth beyond. A cave or gate or auditorium where the last act will expect us to stop narrating and do, and I laugh, first quiet and then real, because bedtime stories are meant to fade into sleep, but this one is waking me up sentence by sentence. I pick up the mask, count 5 breaths into a confidence that feels only slightly counterfeit, and step toward the mouth that waits, the clappers bleached by distance into the faintest metronome. The ring of carved stones behind me keeping its index of stars for those who need a map more than a witness, and the mica crunch under my boots like the sound of memory being edited gently rather than torn. The mouth ahead is less a cave than a throat with its vowel held. Cool breath sliding over my skin as if deciding whether I qualify as sentence or silence. I step in anyway because standing at thresholds too long turns you into furniture. The mica from the bowl follows me in a faint crunch until the floor changes to bedrock polished by older feet. I lift the fox mask and press it briefly to my chest the way you greet a partner before the music begins. First joke whispered to keep the dark from believing it is in charge. If anyone asks, I have a reservation under hopelessly curious, and the echo returns the word smaller but still amused. The corridor bends twice and opens into a chamber like a murmured secret, walls curving smooth, ceiling low enough to teach posture, and on the far side a slab serves as an altar without vanity. Just a stone with the dignity of having been asked to hold attention for a long time. I bow because knees remember what manners forget, then notice objects arranged with simple precision, a metal mirror dark with age, a coil of paper amulets hardened by damp, a shallow basin that still glitters with a thin skin of water fed by a drip I cannot hear but can almost taste, and above them all, charcoal lines on the wall, strokes and circles in clusters like constellations mapped by someone who preferred caves to skies. The mirror unnerves me more than the space, its surface not reflective so much as suggestive, showing a smear that wants to be my face when the drip rings it, showing a torii when I think door, showing a rope across a path just as my ankle remembers the bite from the first nights. And I realize with a bright little wince that the cave is using callbacks like a storyteller with excellent memory, reminding me what I promised the Ronin. Trade a story, not a name. A comforting fact unfolds in my mouth before panic can stake a claim. In 1872, the Meiji state banned shigendo, folding mountain ascetics into other institutions as if you can edit devotion into a new paragraph, shrines and temples unstitched after centuries of marriage, and some valleys watched their guides vanish overnight. That is a history textbook kind of anchor, crisp lines and dates. Yet here the ash-smudged staff-bearers I met are still walking. So I say the date aloud and then the word nevertheless because both deserve equal room. Historians still debate how complete that ban ever was outside cities, whether practice went quiet or truly stopped, whether the state's scissors snipped cloth or just frayed the edges, and my voice sounds steadier for admitting the question is bigger than my boots. I smile because a quirky fact chooses this moment to stride in, that some watchmen in Edo carried little wooden clappers they struck at night, Hayashiji, crying Hai no Yojin to warn of fire. And those clacks were so iconic children later imitated them for play. Neighborhood safety is rhythm. I tap 2 fingers against my palm to borrow the beat and the cave accepts it as currency. A reassurance that not all warnings need to be shouted. Hunger, diligent as ever, interrupts with a small rebellion. So I fish out the toughest scrap of root and chew while staring at the charcoal constellations until they stop being pictures and become instructions, 2 lines slashed with a dot at the end, then a spiral, then a figure that might be a man kneeling or a mountain arranged horizontally, and I hear the Ronin again saying the question changes with the listener. So I try to listen with all the places that hurt, not just my ears. Second joke sneaks out with the root's bitterness. If this altar accepts offerings of sarcasm, I might finally be rich. And somewhere a drop hits the basin with satisfying punctuality. I speak my story because the room is built for it, voice low and steady, telling how I walked under a gate that tried to be a mouth. How a rope snared me polite as a handshake and nearly taught me to fly upside down. How drums without drummers set the air beating against my ribs until I thought my body had learned a new instrument. How a duel ended with a bow instead of blood and felt more dangerous for the restraint. How lanterns turned out to be moths with big ambitions. How a storehouse folded in on its own alphabet so that ledgers about rice and faith could go on pretending they were earth. How a bucket chain taught a valley to breathe in steam and exhale survival. And how I learned to trade jokes for a half-inch of courage whenever hands were busy pulling roofs down before the sparks could appoint themselves landlords. I end with the fox mask pressed to the slab for a heartbeat. Remember that hanging trap from yesterday. The cave and I meet each other's eyes by proxy and decide that feels like a punchline we both respect. The mirror shifts its smear into a cleaner oval, and for an instant I see a helmet crest that could be mine if I invented a lord. Then it dissolves back into cave. I laugh too softly to annoy anything. Third joke offered to the stone so it does not take me too seriously. If you require a signature, please note my handwriting is mostly fog, and the drip signs for me with a plink. To court a different kind of anchor, I name another date, and it's 1876. The Heitori decrees that most civilians stop wearing swords. A neat, practical edict tangled with enormous symbolism. The blade stepping off hips and into museum cases and myth. And the room seems to agree that law and legend often share a bed, then pretend not to know each other in the morning. Scholars argue over how widely the sword bend bit beyond cities, whether it killed a living practice or simply stopped the public theater of it. And while they argue, my bones admit that the weight of a blade and the weight of an expectation feel similar in the dark. I lift the coil of paper charms and it crumbles in my fingers like old snow. revealing a single intact strip beneath with ink still dark. A name scrawled with the confidence of someone who believed. Writing makes you exist a little longer. I press it back gently and instead take a sliver of charcoal from the floor. Draw the simplest thing I can manage on a bare stone. Not a portrait or map, but 4 small marks like stepping stones. Because steps are all I possess that feel honest. The mirror brightens as if pleased by the restraint. I test the edges of the room for exits and find only 2 lies and 1 truth. The lies are breaths that pretend to be openings until you put your foot in them. The truth is a seam by the basin where the water comes from. A shadow narrow as an invitation you have to fold. Yourself to fit, I fold, slide in sideways, and feel rock give under my palm where 1,000 hands smoothed it before mine. The passage rises and the air grows colder in the dignified way of courts, and then it widens into a second chamber, whose floor is a shallow pool, water black and flat as lacquer, ceiling low enough that my breath burrows into it and comes back mint cool. In the middle floats a disc. Not stone, not wood, but a heavily lacquered shield with mirrors inlaid around its rim. A ring of small eyes peering up without malice, currents too subtle to see keep it centered. I kneel on the rock shelf and wait because the room asks for that kind of logic. And a memory obliges. Someone long ago told me of Kagami mirrors used as shintai at certain shrines, objects as bodies for the unseen, hidden behind curtains where only priests looked. Mainstream enough to be in any guidebook yet still secret in practice. And another debate tucks in beside it, whether mirrors at sites like this reflect gods, pilgrims, or the past, whether ritual is a conversation with absence or a technique for teaching fear to behave. No agreement needed tonight. The ring of little mirrors is content to produce a dozen fragments of my face and throw them back at my softer edges. The disc spins once the way a coin decides. A day, and in its turn I glimpse pieces I recognize and do not. A river with swords like coins on its bed. A line of pale figures marching without footprints. A child's doll by a well absorbing stars into its painted eyes. The Ronin's paper armor flexing as rain fails to bully it, and something new. A forest gate not red but black, lacquered with night, beyond which plains open bright enough to sting. I reach to steady the disc and my fingers pause, because touching seems like a misunderstanding of what is offered. So I speak instead. I tell the water that when morning comes I will leave this bowl and carry the useful parts, the count of breath, the etiquette of small fires, the geometry of bows that end fights before they begin, and leave the archive of fear here because the room catalogs better than I do. The mirrors answer by wobbling the smallest yes. On the crawl back, my shoulder brushes the charcoal ring I drew and smears 1 stone into 2. An accident that feels like advice, that leaving is always messier than arriving. And I laugh quietly because bedtime honesty is the only kind I trust these days. I step into the first chamber again, the mirror calmer now, the drip a metronome that no longer needs my fingers. At the threshold, the air warms and carries an edge of resin that belongs to living trees. I bow long enough to feel my back complain. Then stand, fox mask snug, and step out into the mica bowl where dawn is rubbing sleep from its face. I speak one last anchor to the light so it will know my posture when I meet whatever waits. Across the ridge, that historians can argue for a century about whether Bushido is timeless or largely a Meiji confection, but out here chivalry is cheaper than curiosity. An apology is a lever with surprising strength. The ring of stones does not object because rocks are very patient editors. I start up the slope with the Hayashiji beat in my head and the smell of cold water on my skin. The mica crunching like a kindly audience pretending not to notice I am repeating a line to get it right. The notches of the ridge drawing breath like a curtain before it rises. Somewhere behind me the drip continues, and for a childish instant I imagine the cave adding my footsteps to its constellations. For little marks that say a person practiced leaving and then accomplished it, which is a decent review for any night. Dawn does that shy thing where it pretends not to know me and then offers a pale shoulder anyway, so I take it and let the mica crunch under my boots until the ridge smooths into a bench of rock that feels intentionally placed. The fox mask tapping my hip like a punctual editor, and the first landmark of the day appears as if it grew here on purpose. A weathered board on 2 posts with a little roof, a kosatsu notice, characters carved deep enough to outlast most arguments. I bow because even old laws like courtesy and the board responds by flaking a curl of wood that lands on my sleeve. First joke to keep my pulse civilized, public service announcement. No loitering, no arson, no bedtime stories after curfew. And the cicadas pretend not to laugh. I read What Time Has Not Swallowed, prohibitions stacked like small fences, one against Christianity, another about travel permits, one warning of penalties for harboring bandits. The kind of rules every town knew in the long Tokugawa peace. A plain anchor I speak aloud to keep the day stable. That official edicts were posted like this at village entrances so even the illiterate could learn by hearing them recited. And still the wind tastes a little like the ink that once darkened these grooves. A fringe note wanders in like a stray cat, that some notice boards also scolded people for wasting night oil or gossiping too loud, a municipal tone I recognize from modern stairwells, and the thought makes me grin just before the letters ripple, only a blink like minnows under a current, rearranging into what looks suspiciously like a question mark before behaving again. The forest reminding me it can annotate the minutes if it wants. Beyond the board the path narrows, the ground stitched with old cart ruts fossilized into the stone. And the ridge corridor carries sound forward ahead of me. Clack, clack. There it is again, Hayashiji, wooden clappers in a steady rhythm like a neighbor tapping your window with a chopstick to say, "Stove's too hot." Historians still debate whether night watch traditions in Edo acted more as real protection or as social theater that reassured households the city was watching itself. And out here the debate feels less useful than the beat itself, which I borrow to pace my breath. 5 counts in, 5 out, a metronome for choices. I catch a whiff of tobacco, sweet and faint, and my brain hands me a quirky fact without asking. That certain city toughs and even some guards carried kizaru, pipes heavy enough to double as cudgels, accessories with opinions. And just as I think it, a short gray pipe glints from a clump of grass, bowl crushed, stem dented, the smell evaporating like its previous owner. I leave it be because objects out here develop personalities faster than I can get on their good side. The trail kinks left around a boulder and presents me with a trap that believes in education, a rope at shin height. A cousin of the first snare, only this time the counterweight is 2 logs married with pegs and shells. A duet, waiting to kiss my knees and narrate my fall. Zanshin wakes in me like a remembered melody, and I stop a breath before contact. Grin at the rope as if we have met at a reunion. Then ease it down with 2 sticks until the logs rest, polite and thwarted. I whisper, "Remember that hanging trap from yesterday?" I did, and the bamboo applauds by not moving at all. On the far side of the boulder, the forest changes key. Cedars giving way to scattered pines with sunlight poured between them like broth. The slope softens into a shelf the size of a small plaza, and at its center stands a gate so black it eats the morning, torii lacquered not red but night, beam nicked, post sunk in earth that refuses to name itself. The same shape I glimpsed in the mirrors. I step inside and the temperature leans downward. The way thresholds prefer, a ritual chill against the teeth. Scholars still argue cheerfully about where torii began, foreign ancestors adapted or local invention refined over centuries, and I like the argument too much to pick a side, so I let it hum in my pocket while I kneel and press 2 fingers to the ground like I am checking a pulse. Hunger remembers it has rights and files a complaint. I pay with a sliver of root that tries too hard to be food. Second joke mumbled to the trees. If the gods accept offerings in the currency of disappointment, I am finally generous. The wind edits my sarcasm but allows the grin. To the right of the gate, a low stone stands with a shallow bowl cut into it. Water beaded inside though no stream runs here, and the surface holds a reflection that is nearly but not quite mine. A familiar trick, my face mixed with a torii and a plane of brightness beyond. The future photobombing me. I dip my fingertips and the cold wakes my wrists up to their jobs. Beside the basin, a pair of pebbles has been stacked into a miniature cairn. And under those pebbles a name slip waits, Senjafuda ink long bled into sepia, the kanji almost legible. I have promised the Ronin to trade story not name, so I resist adding mine. Instead I draw a tiny fox mask on a corner with a bit of charcoal, a signature without a signature, and press the paper back like a letter folded into itself. The Hayashiji continue faintly from somewhere behind, joined by a different timbre. Bell, not shrine deep but pole-mounted and practical. A watch sound, and a sober fact interrupts like a schoolteacher, that urban neighborhoods had bell towers to warn of fire. Shoro ringing codes for direction and severity, while volunteer brigades, Hikeshire, tore houses down to starve flames. And I think of last night's bucket chain and the way steam became applause for breathing. Historians still debate whether those brigades protected community first or guild pride, but either way the choreography saved lives, and my body files that under relevant scripture. I step beyond the black torii and the world pretends to widen. Pines thinning to show a plain stitched with pale grass and dark seams. A place that looks almost civilized compared to the forest's teeth, though it hums with a different kind of attention, not traps and ghosts but distance and exposure. And for a long moment I just let the sky adjust to me. Then the wind flips a page and something small and practical interrupts grandeur. A kosatsu twin to the earlier board. Half buried, this one carrying a woodblock of a man with a nose I recognize because it could be mine. An artist's shorthand for every traveler, and beneath it a warning against crossing at night, against lighting fires in fields, against bringing wolves closer with meat. Rules with dirt under their nails. I bow to the primary source and thank it for existing long enough to be unhelpful. I cut left because the grass whispers less that way and find a row of stones, stood on end like a low sentence without punctuation, each etched with shallow lines that could be map or poetry, and for a second my stomach gets tricked into thinking they are loaves cooling on a shelf. Third joke smuggled through a grin. Artisan bread, limited edition, pre-toasted by legend, and even the crows decide that one deserves a diplomatic caw. A legitimate question rises like a hand in the back of a classroom. Whether ninja were ever as ubiquitous and shadow-perfect as later tales insist, or whether espionage was mostly patient work, done in broad daylight by people with ordinary shoes and better ears, historians still debate the ratio of theater to tradecraft, and the plane likes the question enough to deliver a tiny answer. 3 figures at the far edge, robes dusted, moving not like cats on rooftops but like clerks on errands, unremarkable on purpose. I take the hint and lower my head until I look like weather. The black gate behind me does not warm or warn. It simply stands, and the plane opens a path toward a darker streak where the earth dips, a dry watercourse with stones rounded by a river that auditioned elsewhere today. I follow it because channels are honest and because the fox mask has begun that subtle tug it does when I need to stop performing choices and actually choose. I slide down the bank and find, tucked in a bend, an old official marker half swallowed by silt. Milestone, distance to a town I have never seen, numbers chewed by minerals but still counting. A polite reminder that roads existed before I decided walking was dramatic. The air sweetens unexpectedly, a hint of miso and smoke drifting from nowhere, and the plane fills with the smallest domestic noises, ladle against pot, cloth shaken. Someone whistling off key, and I stop because these sounds are too tender to walk through without becoming a thief. I speak softly toward the wind that I am not here to take, only to witness, that I have practiced the bow that ends fights and the breath that keeps rope traps from writing letters on my knees, that the duel that refused blood made me greedy for forms of mercy that look like discipline, and that I will pass the fields as if every blade of grass had to be approved by a committee. The wind signs the receipt with a ripple and the miso vanishes, a test that I think I pass by missing it. At the edge of the dry channel stands another board, smaller, without roof, a private notice nailed by a patient hand, both characters and drawings. A little fox with a rice stalk, a warning that if harvest fails the mountain will not be asked for more. A promise that if someone vanishes the rest will leave their doors open 3 days. And a request that travelers ring a bell at the grove before they sleep. Practical, generous, and entirely unsupervised by any magistrate. A reminder that policy and kindness often travel different roads. I touch the nail heads, cold and confident in their jobs. And the mask warms at my side like agreement. The plane begins to slope again toward a line of darker trees, and I know by the way the light gathers there that another threshold waits. Maybe the place where the cave's little mirrors saw me standing as if from the other side of morning. And I am oddly calm about it, more practiced now at aligning my spine to questions I cannot answer. I say one last steadying thing to the air because anchors deserve equal time with mystery. That printing in Edo flooded towns with cheap woodblock guides and maps, making pilgrims of people who had never been farther than the next market, and that the 5 great roads taught millions how to organize a journey into places and pauses, not just distances. The plane listens politely, as planes do, and does not correct me. I walk until the grass brushes my knees and the black torii shrinks behind me into a punctuation mark on the ridge. The Hayashiji beat faint as memory, the miso sound gone, and ahead the darker trees arrange themselves into a notch like a mouth that has practiced both blessing and refusal. I shift the fox mask to my hands and carry it like a bowl, breathing to 5 and letting the drum without drummers settle again into my ribs. And when I reach the first shadow I bow as if an audience were already seated. Because maybe it is, because maybe the question tonight will be how to leave without disappearing, and I would like to get that one right. The darker trees close in like curtains pulled by a stagehand in no hurry, trunks straight and tall, branches hung with mist that feels heavier than its weight. I step beneath them and the world edits itself quieter. No crows, no cicadas, only the kind of hush that takes attendance. The fox mask cool in my hands like an audience ticket, and the ground softens into loam that keeps no record of my steps. First joke whispered because silence this thick needs a vent. If the forest is grading my posture, I hope they curve the results. And a drop of dew falls at my feet as if signing the exam. Ahead the path narrows to a strip of bare earth bordered by stones. A deliberate line like a throat waiting for words. And midway down it stands a bell, waist high, hung from a frame of unpainted cedar, its rope braided from reeds instead of hemp. Worn smooth by palms not mine, I bow before touching because bells prefer manners, then lift the rope and ring once. The sound rolls low and wide, not bright like temple bells but earthy, like a barrel rolling under floorboards. I feel it in ribs and teeth, and the forest exhales in kind. Mist shifting left and right as if pulled by invisible sleeves. A steady fact surfaces like a stone under water, that bells mark time and fire in towns as much as prayers. Watch towers with signals coded so neighbors knew which quarter burned. The kind of everyday vigilance that saved more roofs than sermons. And I think of last night's bucket chain and how steam turned panic into applause. Historians still debate whether those codes were standardized across the shogunate or improvised district by district, a reminder that even safety can be parochial, and the thought settles into me like a polite weight. I ring the bell a second time because one note felt incomplete, and the mist obliges by thinning into a path that curves gently uphill, where shadows weave into one another like braids. I follow with the mask pressed to my side. And soon the trunks arrange themselves into a circle, 20 or more, each bearing paper charms pinned into bark, edges curling but ink still legible, senjafuta left by pilgrims who pressed names. or prayers, the circle itself forming a kind of registry. I stop at one marked with a fox face drawn clumsy but earnest, a child's or a tired adult's, and resist the itch to add mine, remembering again the promise not to spend a name. Instead, I murmur a story about last night's valley, about the woman who caught my wrist before fire and foolishness hurt both of us, and how gratitude feels heavier than spears sometimes. And the charm flutters like a listener nodding. A quirky note elbows its way into my head, that some villages once hung gourds on sacred trees as charms against drought, believing their hollowness invited rain to fill them. And suddenly I notice a gourd tied among the charms, shriveled but stubborn, its rind cracked into rivers of age, and I laugh softly at the confirmation. Second joke muttered. If that thing fills with rain tonight, I am starting a bottled water business. And the mist pretends not to grin. The path out of the circle tilts sharper, and my calves complain like bureaucrats. The air thins until breath feels taxable, and then I find steps cut directly into rock, rough but deliberate, climbing toward a lip of cliff where light bleeds in slats. I climb because refusal feels smaller than regret, counting the beats like Hayashiji in my chest. 1, 2, 1, 2, the rhythm of persistence, and crest onto a shelf with a view so sudden it steals words. Valley far below still scarred by black ash seams. Plain stretching beyond with faint fields stitched. Across, and in the near distance, across a gorge, a building clings to rock. Long hall with roofline curling at the ends like eyebrows, a temple or something temple-shaped. Wood bleached by sun until it looks like bone. I breathe because forgetting to seems possible, and I remember a debate that refuses retirement, whether cliff temples like this were built for defense, retreat, or spectacle, whether ascetics wanted isolation or advertisement, and I, like that, scholars still argue it because standing here the structure looks equally like fortress and stage, equally like prayer and performance. Third joke offered to the gorge so it carries better. If they charge admission, I hope they accept sarcasm as currency. And the echo tries the line out a second time as if rehearsing. To reach it, I must follow a ledge that hugs the cliff. The trail thin enough to remind me not to exhale too flamboyantly. I test the edge with a heel, then a toe, then a commitment, moving sideways with the fox mask tucked under arm like contraband. The gorge below, a mouth rehearsing hunger. But the stone holds, step by careful step, until I round a corner and see a rope bridge swinging loose across the span. Planks missing, ropes furry with moss, a dare written in weather. I laugh once to keep my knees awake, whisper to the mask that stories demand cliches now and then, and step onto the first plank which groans like an old teacher sighing. The second holds, the third does not exist, so I lean and stretch. Gripping rope like a hand I owe money to, moving forward one negotiation at a time, until the other side agrees to accept me. The hall greets with silence that feels practiced. Doors wide but dark inside, banners faded to whispers, yet incense lingers as if memory has its own lungs, and I bow long enough for my back to ache, because even absence deserves posture. The hall breathes dust at me as though testing my manners. Rafters arching like ribs above a body that forgot it was supposed to collapse. I step inside and the floor sags politely but holds, fox mask tucked beneath my arm like a borrowed credential. First joke whispered to keep the beams from judging. If this place falls, I am billing the forest for structural negligence, and a drift of ash somewhere answers with the softest cough. Light filters in strips through torn shoji panels, turning motes into constellations, and at the far end a dais waits, low and austere, where once must have sat a statue now vanished. Only the pedestal remains, its outline clear where offerings once gathered, coins, rice, maybe sake, but now only dust bowls curve into absence. I kneel because I do not know which deity once occupied this hall, but absence is still a guest you bow to. And in that bow my thoughts untangle a fact that steadies me. Cliffside temples like this were often rebuilt after fire or quake, each version layered on bones of the last. sometimes preserving scrolls or relics in hidden alcoves, and sometimes starting fresh as though memory could be scaffolded. Scholars still debate whether these structures were primarily places of worship or retreat, whether ascetics sought the edge for isolation or spectacle, but either way the balance between cliff and faith becomes clear when your knees ache on uneven planks. A sound interrupts, faint scratching, and I follow it to a corner where offerings remain. Not coins but folded papers, hundreds of them pressed into the cracks, senbazuru perhaps. Tiny cranes stacked wing to wing, their colors faded into sepia but their intent still sharp, to fold 1,000 for healing, for protection, for impossible requests. I touch one and it crumbles, but another holds its crease stubborn, and I whisper gratitude to whoever's fingers once did the folding. A quirky note arrives to keep me company, that in some mountain temples villagers once left straw sandals as offerings, believing the gods would walk in them on patrol, and suddenly I see a pair tucked behind a beam, brittle but unmistakable, their soles thin as rice paper, and I grin despite the ache in my stomach. Second joke muttered, footwear donations accepted, size irrelevant, spiritual mileage may vary, and the sandals decline to laugh but they do not fall apart. Hunger makes itself known in the hollow way, and I chew dried root that tastes of sawdust with ambitions, the mask warm against my arm as if approving endurance, and then I hear the sound again, this time from beneath the floorboards. A scurrying that pauses when I shift. And I remember another fact, temples often kept storehouses beneath their floors, not just for rice or sutras but for fire protection, raised flooring letting air pass through. A small architectural precaution. I lift one board gently and a draft greets me, cool and sharp, carrying a smell of ink, and within the gap lies a box, cedar lid carved with a half moon. I bow without opening, then slide it forward until light spills over. Inside, scrolls brittle, ink flaking, yet lines still legible, brush strokes declaring sutras or maybe records of names, and I realize with a start that this hall, though abandoned, still shelters memory like a lung keeps air even after a cry. I close the lid respectfully and slide it back, then whisper aloud that I will not steal names, only witness them, and the scurrying ceases, as though the hall's small guardians are satisfied. On the dais I place my own story as offering, telling how I crossed a rope bridge that threatened to edit me out, how I bowed to gourds tied to trees and laughed at their stubbornness, how a kosatsu warned me about wolves and gossip in equal measure, and how the mask at my side has taught me to measure each joke like spice, enough to flavor but not to drown. The hall accepts, or at least it does not collapse, and that feels like a handshake. Outside the view opens again, gorge yawning wide, and beyond, the plain stretching to another seam of trees darker than before, and I understand the journey is a series of stages, each hall, each shrine, each cairn a line in a long poem I am reciting to an audience I cannot see. Third joke slips out like a sigh. If they clap at the end, I hope it is not just thunder, and somewhere in the rafters a small bird shifts as though keeping rhythm. I bow once more to the pedestal, to the sandals, to the paper cranes, then step back across the hall and out into light, where the wind presses my shoulders forward as if nudging me to keep the story moving. The wind pushes at my back like an usher guiding me out of the hall, and I step onto the ledge again, rope bridge swaying faintly behind me as though relieved it no longer has to hold my weight. I tuck the fox mask under my arm and descend along a switchback path carved into the cliffside, stones cut by someone who believed geometry could tame gravity. First joke whispered to keep my steps from counting themselves too seriously. If I slip, at least the scenery will applaud on the way down, and the gorge answers with a long, low breath. The path spirals downward into a gorge floor, layered with pine needles and the skeletons of floods. Stones polished into lazy shapes, water absent but its memory stubborn in the smell of wet rock. I pause to let my eyes adjust to shadow and find that even here the forest has left its paperwork. A small post leaning at an angle, inscription carved deep enough to resist erosion, warning travelers to beware of wolves at night and to bow before crossing to the other side. I obey the bow, spine aching but honest. And in that bow I remember a historical fact that keeps me anchored, that in the Edo period official post stations warned of dangers both mundane and supernatural, sometimes adding drawings of foxes or tengu to make fear more persuasive, law and folklore sharing the same bulletin board. I grin because the quirky detail fits too perfectly. In some villages, wooden amulets were nailed to posts with carved eyes painted wide, serving as talismans against theft, and suddenly I notice the post before me has faint circles carved near its top, now weathered into anonymity, and I bow again out of respect for those eyes. The gorge narrows to a throat and the air thickens with damp, and soon I find a stream whispering over stones, cold and stubborn, cutting its way forward like a quill scratching a line across the ground. I crouch to drink, the taste iron-sharp and cleansing, and the mask warms faintly as if acknowledging hydration as a sacrament. I follow the stream until it curves into a grove where cedars lean over like gossiping monks, and in the center a stone platform rises, flat and square, its surface covered with carved hexagons like a tortoise shell. I step onto it and the forest answers with stillness so complete it hums, and I recall the debate that never quite resolves, whether tortoise-shell divination in early Japan was imported from China or developed independently, whether the cracks formed by fire were read as voices of kami or as imported technique. Scholars argue with vigor, but here the stone just waits, carved into permanence, a divination table without fire. I press my palm to one hexagon and whisper my question. Not survival, not direction, but whether stories can change weight when spoken instead of swallowed. And the stone hums slightly under my hand. Not answer, not refusal, only acknowledgement, which is better than certainty. Hunger interrupts again, diligent as tax. And I chew another scrap of root that has the culinary charm of bark. Second joke muttered, if Michelin ever visits this forest, they are giving it 0 stars. And the trees pretend not to smirk. Beyond the platform, a new path rises, lined with stones stacked in small cairns, each crowned with a pebble placed by someone's passing hand. A custom alive in both pilgrimage trails and war memorials, gestures layered until they form a topography of memory. I add one stone from the stream, balanced carefully, and whisper aloud the story of the paper cranes folded in the hall, and the cairn seems to grow a breath taller. The path climbs again, and my calves whimper, but I thank them anyway. For in the distance, the trees break into an opening where the light burns sharp, and at the center stands another gate, this one not Tori but Shimenawa, a sacred rope strung between two leaning pines, paper streamers hanging tired but intact. I step through and feel the air shift, not colder this time but heavier, as though the ground beneath me is full of unfinished sentences. And I bow once more because even commas deserve courtesy. Third joke slips out almost kindly. If every bend in this forest gets a bow, my spine will be fluent in humility, and the wind nudges me forward with something close to laughter. I continue until the slope steadies and the trees part to show a ridge beyond, where another structure waits, less a hall, more a gatehouse, its roof slanted, its beams scarred with claw marks that may be weather or memory, and I know before stepping closer that this night's question will not be asked politely, and that I will need every bow, every breath, every story I have rehearsed so far. The gatehouse leans over the ridge like a tired sentinel, roof tiles cracked and slipping, beams gray with years of rain, yet it stands as if stubbornness is more durable than carpentry. I pause before stepping closer, and the fox mask warms at my hip, reminding me that thresholds deserve performance. First joke whispered to keep my knees cooperative. If this place collapses, I will finally find out whether I can fly without tuition fees. and the silence answers with a creak as if humoring me. The posts bear scars, claw marks long as my forearm, gouges that might be wolves or might be weather, and historians still debate whether. Such marks on shrines were genuine records of beasts or rituals carved by villagers to symbolize protection. Some argue they were prayers in reverse, inviting what was feared so that it would not visit in flesh, and I run my hand along the grooves, feeling both possibilities at once. Inside the gatehouse is shadow, cool and thick, smelling faintly of straw and smoke, as though someone once camped here to guard the pass, and I remember the historical fact that post stations in the mountains sometimes doubled as watch huts, manned by lower-ranking samurai or conscripted peasants, tasked with counting travelers and warning of bandits. And though this hut is too ruined for paperwork, the posture of vigilance still clings to its beams. A quirky note nudges me that some Edo checkpoints were infamous not for catching criminals but for confiscating women trying to flee domains without permission. An inversion of watchfulness into control, and I step carefully because the ground here feels thick with names withheld. Beneath a collapsed beam I find a ledger stone, flat and inscribed, its top row still legible. Tally marks carved like prisoners counting days, perhaps a guard's record of passages, perhaps a pilgrim's private devotion. I add a line with charcoal out of respect. Not a tally of people but of questions survived. Hunger interrupts, sharp and insistent, and I chew dried root until it splinters like chalk. Second joke muttered, if this gatehouse ever hosted an in the reviews would highlight starvation as the main attraction. And the wind through the broken roof hisses like a disapproving innkeeper. In the far corner a bell rests, cracked in half but still recognizable, its clapper missing. And I bow before touching it, then lift the hollow weight to my ear and knock gently. The sound dull but stubborn, like a voice insisting it once spoke clearly, and I whisper a promise to carry its echo forward. Outside the ridge narrows into a spine with the plain yawning on one side and the gorge on the other, the trail carved so thin it feels like walking on a sentence without punctuation, and the fox mask insists on my hand now, as if balance requires a partner. I walk carefully, breath aligned to the rhythm of the Hayashiji in memory, and reach a point where the ridge broadens just enough to host a cluster of stone figures, Jizo statues, lined shoulder to shoulder. Each worn smooth, faces almost erased, bibs long rotted away, yet still watching, still waiting. I bow and place a pebble on the nearest head, recalling the mainstream practice of parents offering stones to Jizo for children lost, a ritual of both mourning and continuity, and here the stones have stacked high, as though grief itself has been building architecture. A debate rises unbidden, whether the proliferation of roadside Jizo in the Edo era was driven by popular piety or by official neglect of centralized temples, whether local faith filled gaps left by structured institutions. Scholars still argue, but tonight the statues ask no theory, only posture, and I give it gladly. Third joke escapes gently. If these stone guardians had mouths they would tell me to quit leaning on jokes like crutches, but then they would have to admit they have been standing still for centuries, and the mist stirs like a smile. Beyond them the ridge dips into another corridor of trees, darker and denser, and the path folds inward, promising the next question will not wait politely at a hall or a shrine but step directly into my way. And I adjust the mask, bow once more to the statues, and let the shadows close around me like curtains between scenes. The corridor of trees presses close enough that my shoulders brush bark. Branches interlace overhead to weave a ceiling of shadows, the air damp and smelling of resin and old breath. I keep the fox mask in hand because it feels rude to cover my face here, as if the forest prefers honesty. First joke whispered to steady nerves. If these trunks decide to close in any tighter, I will start charging rent. And a drop of condensation lands on my forehead like a skeptical landlord. The path tilts downward and narrows until it resembles a hallway, the ground lined with roots polished by countless steps, and my mind anchors to a fact for balance. Many pilgrimage trails in the Edo period were maintained by local guilds, merchants funding repairs as acts of piety or advertisement, inscriptions carved into stones to remind travelers of generosity, and I wonder whose hands once managed this corridor, who carved their virtue into maintenance. A quirky detail arrives like a bird on a shoulder. In some valleys, villagers set wind chimes along forest trails, believing their tinkling warned off fox spirits, and though none hang here, I hear faint chimes in the distance, phantom or memory, and it makes me grin. The ground levels and then widens abruptly into a clearing so round it feels designed. At its center, a single pole rises, taller than the trees, topped by a faded banner flapping in slow arcs, its fabric embroidered with waves and cranes, threads unraveling but intent unmistakable. A prayer flag claiming this hollow as sacred. I bow because the pole deserves it, and in the bow I remember the debate scholars still chew on, whether such banners were local inventions or borrowed from continental traditions, whether they marked processions or boundaries, or simply reminded travelers that gods were watching, and I like the ambiguity because it makes the pole more alive. At the base, stones have been arranged in circles, some small, some wide, cairns upon cairns, offerings of effort. I add one pebble and murmur the story of the Jizo statues I left behind, and the circle accepts with silence. Hunger interrupts with a petulant growl, and I chew dried root. Second joke muttered with dry mouth. Gourmet dining. Tonight's special is bark flambe served on imaginary plates. And the wind decides not to correct me. The banner above shifts suddenly, revealing painted characters faint but legible, words that seem to form a question. Who do you carry, pilgrim? And who carries you? My breath stalls because the question feels heavier than my pack. And I whisper a cautious answer, that I carry the fox mask, the memory of cranes folded for protection, the sound of clappers warning of fire, and in return I am carried by the weight of stones, by the patience of statues, by the humor that sneaks in when fear overreaches, and the banner flaps once as if acknowledging. From the edge of the clearing another path begins, narrower, steeper, lined with small shrines carved into stumps, each no taller than my knee, their doors ajar, offerings long gone. Yet each one feels like an ear listening. I kneel before the first and leave a scrap of charcoal, a token of the stories I have written in the dirt, and move on, repeating the gesture until my pockets are empty. At the last shrine I pause because inside rests a mask smaller than mine. Carved wood, fox features exaggerated, teeth bared in a grin, and I bow before touching, then lift it gently, its weight lighter than expectation, its grin wider than mine, and for a moment I imagine a child leaving it here as a promise to grow into, and I smile because the forest knows how to return gifts. Third joke murmured with a grin, if I wear both masks maybe I will qualify for a 2-for-1 survival discount, and the trees sway as though debating. I tuck the small mask into my sleeve and continue, the path winding tighter, darker, and ahead I glimpse light that is not dawn or sun but fire, a faint orange shimmer rising and falling, and I know the next question waits not in silence, but in flame, ready to ask with heat instead of words. The glow sharpens with each step until the air warms my cheeks. I ease forward into a hollow where flames dance inside stone basins arranged in a ring, each fire small but together casting a circle of trembling light. I pause at the edge because entering feels like volunteering, the fox mask warm in my hand like it knows the cost. First joke whispered so the fire won't mistake my silence for fear. If this is a barbecue I forgot to bring sauce, and a tongue of flame leans toward me like a critic unimpressed. I step inside and the fires gutter but do not die, instead they flare in rhythm, left, right, forward, back, and I realize it is not random but choreographed, a cadence echoing something older, and my mind steadies on a fact. In ancient rituals, fire was used as both boundary and invitation. Bonfires lit to ward spirits, yet also to guide them. Midsummer flames and festival torches signaling both danger and celebration. And I wonder which side of the line I stand on. A quirky thought inserts itself that in certain mountain villages, children leapt over small bonfires to prove courage, leaving their parents torn between pride and panic. And suddenly one of the flames here tilts low enough that I could step across. And I grin despite myself. Second joke muttered, "If I burn my trousers, the spirits better cover the tailor's fee." And the flame flickers as if amused. At the center of the ring sits a low stone slab with a single object. Resting on it, a drum, hide stretched taut, mallets resting crosswise, its surface reflecting fire in wavering lines. I approach cautiously, bow once, then touch the rim. And the fires respond by leaning inward like an audience. I lift a mallet and strike lightly, the sound not loud but deep, a heartbeat more than a note, and the fires flare in unison, answering, so I strike again, and the rhythm grows. My pulse matching the drum, and I remember the debate that never ends among historians, whether taiko drums in early festivals were instruments of music or weapons of rhythm. Rallying soldiers and dancers alike, and here the debate resolves itself. Rhythm commands both body and flame. I play 3 beats, pause, then 3 again, the fires shaping themselves into higher walls, enclosing me, and the mask grows hotter against my palm as though urging me to continue, so I play a longer phrase, improvised but steady, and the fires rise, forming shapes, shadows cast against the mist above, outlines of foxes, of cranes, of faceless figures carrying torches, their movements stitched to my rhythm. Hunger chooses this moment to complain, and I bite into root between beats, chewing while drumming. Second joke whispered, multitasking, musician and starving pilgrim, please hold your applause, and the flames shimmer as though clapping anyway. The rhythm slows without my choosing, my arms heavy, the mallets slipping slightly, and the fires answer by dimming, shadows folding back into sparks, until only embers remain in the basins, red eyes watching. I place the mallets back, bow to the drum, and whisper thanks for the conversation, for rhythm that asked without demanding answers. And in the silence after the bow I hear faint clack-clack, the hayashiji again, distant but steady, as though marking my departure. Third joke slips out on tired breath. If that sound is just termites chewing, would I am giving them full credit as percussionists. And the forest chuckles in creaks. I step beyond the ring and the air cools, smoke curling into nothing, and ahead the path bends toward a darker slope where the trees lean like an audience, dissatisfied with the ending, and I know the next question waits not in fire but in silence, ready to measure what rhythm has left behind. The slope accepts me into silence so complete it feels, rehearsed, trees leaning together until the canopy becomes a roof, the ground muffled by moss that swallows every step. I keep the fox mask in hand because covering my face here feels like lying. First joke murmured to keep the quiet from chewing me whole. If this is the waiting room, I hope they serve tea. And the silence responds with a drip of water somewhere deep ahead. I follow the sound until the slope folds into a cavern mouth. Wide and low, air cool and wet like stone exhaling. I bow before entering because thresholds are conversations. And within the darkness a stream runs along the floor, thin but determined, its trickle amplified until it sounds like speech. My eyes adjust and reveal carvings on the walls, shallow figures etched in lines, processions of people carrying staffs, animals with exaggerated ears, circles overlapping like diagrams. And my mind steadies on a fact that offers company. Prehistoric rock carvings in Japan have been found near water sources, their meanings uncertain but often linked to rituals of fertility or protection, reminders that humans have been sketching questions into stone since before paper existed. I brush one figure with my fingertips and flakes of moss crumble, revealing a fox-like snout beneath, and a quirky thought elbows its way in. That travelers once scratched graffiti onto temple walls to mark their presence. Names layered until caretakers had to scrub them away. Proof that even piety carries the urge to leave signatures, and I smile because the impulse feels familiar. Deeper in, the stream widens into a pool lit faintly by a shaft of light from a crack above, the water clear enough to show stones at its bottom arranged into a spiral. Deliberate, not natural, a marker of someone's intent. Scholars still debate whether such stone arrangements were calendars, maps, or offerings, arguments circling like the spiral itself, and I kneel to trace the outer ring with a stick, whispering aloud my own offering, that I am not here to conquer the forest but to survive it without becoming smaller. The pool accepts the whisper, rippling once before stilling. Hunger gnaws again, and I chew a bitter strip of bark. Second joke muttered with dry lips. Fine dining. Chef special is disappointment with a garnish of splinters, and the cavern politely ignores me. From the far side of the pool, a narrow tunnel slopes upward, walls tight, air heavy, and I crawl into it, shoulders scraping. Mask pressed flat to my chest, until the tunnel widens abruptly into a chamber where the ceiling glitters faintly, flecks of mica catching what little light sneaks through cracks, like stars painted by a patient hand. At the chamber's center lies a stone basin filled not with water but ash, pale and undisturbed. I bow before it and whisper thanks to whoever once tended this place. And in the silence after the bow I hear the faint clack-clack of Hayashiji again. But this time it echoes from within the stone itself, not outside, as though the forest has smuggled sound into rock. Third joke escapes with a nervous grin, if termites start carrying percussion. Instruments, I am officially retiring, and the chamber seems to sigh in amusement. I leave a pebble in the basin, not sure if it counts as offering or trespass, then backtrack to the tunnel, crawling until daylight stabs my eyes, emerging onto another slope where the trees thin and the wind tastes sharper, like iron, and ahead a ridge rises, promising that whatever waits will not be written in silence but carved in open. The ridge rises before me like a long breath the earth forgot to exhale, its spine narrow and sharp, stones jagged underfoot. I steady the fox mask against my chest because balance here feels like a form of prayer. First joke murmured so the wind does not mistake me for solemn. If gravity wins this argument, at least the view will be spectacular, and the gorge below sighs as if it has heard that promise before. Step by step I climb, boots scraping, calves burning, until the ridge widens just enough to host a scatter of stone pillars, some upright, some toppled, their surfaces carved with kanji weathered to half-legibility, fragments of edicts, blessings, or names. I bow to each as if punctuation demands it. And in those bows I recall a fact that grounds me. Mountain passes in the Edo period were often marked with steels inscribed with prayers for safe passage, protection against landslides or bandits. Their words meant to anchor courage in stone. Between the pillars the wind funnels like a flute, carrying whispers that sound almost intentional. And I remember a quirky detail, that some villages placed bamboo tubes in windy spots so the air would sing, warding off spirits or simply making the night less lonely. And suddenly I hear one note that does not belong, a whistle of bamboo lodged in the rocks. And I grin at the confirmation. The ridge narrows again, forcing me sideways, stones loose underfoot. But soon it spills into a plateau, flat enough for rest, where a fire pit of blackened stones lies abandoned. Ashes still cling, though rain has tried to erase them, and I crouch to touch the char, whispering aloud a recognition that others passed this way, perhaps pilgrims, perhaps hunters. And my mind folds in another steady fact. Travelers often gathered at such points to share food and stories. The act of communal survival turning strangers into companions for a night. Hunger gnaws at me, and I chew the last strip of bark in my pocket. Second joke muttered between dry bites. Michelin's inspector would write atmosphere excellent, food imaginary, and the wind decides not to disagree. From the far side of the plateau rises a stone stair. Rough but deliberate, climbing toward a frame of wooden beams half collapsed. A gate without walls, its roof fallen but its posts stubborn, and I bow before stepping through, because ruins still insist on etiquette. Beyond the gate spreads a field of tall grass, swaying like waves, dotted with cairns stacked haphazardly, some neat, some crumbling, each with a single token on top, a coin, a scrap of cloth, a broken comb. I kneel at one cairn and leave a pebble whispering the story of the cavern pool spiral, how water held questions in silence, and the cairn leans almost imperceptibly as if listening. Scholars still debate whether such cairn fields marked mass burials, battlefields, or were simply communal sites of offering, and the ambiguity tugs at my chest, because here they feel like voices gathered without bodies, presence carved from absence. I walk carefully among them until the grass parts to reveal a larger stone, flat and wide, etched with concentric rings, and I realize it mirrors the spiral beneath the pool, only grander, bolder, as though the question has grown. I press my palm to the center and whisper, aloud, asking not for survival this time but for meaning, and the wind answers with a sudden rush through the grass, bending every stalk toward the west. Third joke slips out on the exhale. If this is the forest's idea of directions, I hope it comes with a map app. And the grass shakes like laughter. I shoulder the mask again and follow the bend of stalks, stepping westward toward another line of trees where the light thins. Aware that every cairn behind me still listens, as though carrying my words forward to a place I cannot yet see. The western path narrows between walls of grass until the stalks lean so close they brush my cheeks, seeds catching in my hair, the air thick with their dry hiss, and I keep the fox mask tucked beneath my arm because to wear it here feels like trying to hide from gossip. First joke muttered low so the grass won't misinterpret. If this is the forest's idea of applause, it needs to work on rhythm, and the hiss shifts as if testing its timing. The trail bends downward into a shallow basin where water once lingered, now a marsh stitched with reeds and mud. Stepping stones scattered like careless punctuation. I balance across them and remember a steady fact. During the Edo era, many roads wound through marshland, maintained by locals who placed flat stones to aid passage, though floods often stole them, forcing travelers to leap or wade, and here each stone feels like a remnant of that patience. I pause midway because a reed bundle rises from the muck, bound tightly with straw rope, shaped like a figure crouching, its head a hollow gourd with holes for eyes, and my breath catches, though the air smells only of damp grass. A quirky detail bubbles up from memory, that villagers sometimes built scarecrows resembling spirits to guard fields, believing their presence fooled both animals and mischief makers. And I bow instinctively because this figure, mud-caked and silent, deserves courtesy. Hunger stirs like an old argument, and I gnaw another scrap of bitter bark. Second joke grumbled as splinters sting my tongue. Fine cuisine continues. Tonight's pairing is mud perfume with woody undertones, and the marsh pretends not to laugh. The path twists toward firmer ground where three more figures stand. Bound reed guardians in different poses, one with arms outstretched, one crouched, one leaning as though mid-stride, each crowned with gourds that grin through carved slits. My steps slow because the arrangement feels deliberate, a procession frozen. And I recall scholars still debate whether such effigies were purely agricultural guardians or had ritual purpose, whether they marked festivals tied to rice cycles or were guardians of thresholds. I bow to each in turn and whisper aloud the story of the fire drumming ring, of rhythm that made shadows dance, and the reed figures seem to lean slightly as if adjusting to listen. Past them the ground firms into a slope rising toward a stand of cedar trees older than any I have seen, their trunks wide as towers, bark furrowed deep, roots braided across the earth like veins. At their base rests a hollowed log, polished smooth by years of touch. Inside it faint scraps of paper remain, ink blurred but still legible in strokes, travelers leaving names or prayers. I bow and resist the urge to add mine, instead pressing the fox mask against the wood and whispering thanks. And the cedar hums faintly as if acknowledging. Third joke slips from dry lips. If these trees have been eavesdropping for centuries, I hope they keep secrets better than people. And a cone drops softly at my feet, a polite chuckle in seed form. Beyond the cedars, the slope flattens into a clearing where the air brightens faintly. But at its center lies a circle of stones blackened by fire, larger than any before. Arranged in precise geometry, triangles and squares interlocked, and I understand that the next question will not be asked by silence or flame alone, but by patterns, waiting to test whether I can read without language. The circle of stones waits like a puzzle someone set and then abandoned, each rock blackened with fire, arranged into triangles nested within squares, the geometry too deliberate to be chance. I step closer slowly because the air inside the pattern feels heavier than the clearing beyond, and the fox mask warms against my arm as if recognizing old rules. First joke slips out to keep my nerves honest. If this is a board game, I definitely forgot the instruction manual, and the stones remain silent judges. I crouch and run my fingers across the surface, soot flaking into my skin, and I anchor myself in a fact. Japanese esoteric sects once used mandala patterns drawn on the ground for initiation. Rituals, geometric designs embodying entire cosmologies. And here the stone pattern echoes that intention even without color. A quirky detail surfaces that, in some villages, children played. Hopscotch like games on crude mandalas carved into dirt, blurring sacred with ordinary, laughter with prayer, and I grin because the urge to turn reverence into play feels universal. At the center rests a single flat stone, smooth as water, its surface scratched faintly with lines that might be writing or just erosion. I bow before stepping onto it and whisper aloud that I come not to solve but to witness. And the clearing tightens in its silence. Hunger gnaws again, so I chew dried bark until my teeth ache. Second joke muttered bitterly, if enlightenment tastes like this, I will stick to ignorance. And the trees lean as if pretending not to smirk. The wind stirs and the soot swirls into shapes, faint outlines of cranes, foxes, and faceless figures, patterns that ripple before collapsing. And I remember historians still debate whether such fire circles were meant for summoning spirits or simply focusing meditation. And the ambiguity fits, because even as I stand here, I feel both possibilities press at me. I kneel and place a pebble from the marsh in the circle's corner, whispering the story of the reed. Guardians with their gored heads, how they stood like listeners at the threshold, and the soot settles as though agreeing to file the memory. When I rise, the geometry seems altered, the square edges softened into curves, as if the circle itself has absorbed the offering. I step carefully outside the pattern and bow again, because whether it was ritual or game, it deserves closure. Then continue along the path that threads upward through thickets of bamboo, their stalks clattering like hollow bones. The sound unsettles me until I remember a fact that steadies. Bamboo groves often marked sacred approaches, planted to signify liminality, and their clatter was interpreted as voices of guardians. A quirky thought presses in, that some Edo-era travelers cut bamboo into flutes to carry on journeys, music as both comfort and defense. And I imagine the grove itself playing one now, each stalk testing notes in the breeze. Third joke murmured while brushing a stalk with my hand. If the forest starts charging performance fees, I will be broke by sundown. And the bamboo rattles as if amused. The grove thins, revealing a slope that crests toward light brighter than I have seen in days, and from beyond it rises the sound of rushing water, steady and insistent, promising that the next question waits not in fire or stone, but in the current of a river wide enough to test every step I have taken so far. The rush of water grows louder until it swallows the whispers of bamboo behind me. The path spills into a ledge where the forest breaks open, and before me stretches a river wide and restless, its surface shattered by currents, froth curling white against black rocks. I grip the fox mask tighter because balance here feels negotiable. First joke whispered, so the river won't assume superiority. If I try to swim, this thing better have lifeguards on call. And the spray answers with a cool slap across my face. The bank is lined with flat stones carved into steps, some half submerged, forming the suggestion of a crossing, and I recall a fact that steadies my breath in the Edo period. Highways often forced travelers to ford rivers directly, with bearers carrying the wealthy across on shoulders while the rest braved currents with ropes, drowning not uncommon. Rivers doubling as tolls collected by nature. A quirky detail surfaces that makes me smile despite the roar. That ferrymen sometimes composed poems midstream to distract nervous passengers, promising survival in borrowed syllables, and I imagine one now, reciting verse over the torrent while praying his balance kept rhymes afloat. I step onto the first stone and bow to the river because asking permission feels wiser than defiance. The current presses spray into my eyes but does not shove. So I continue one step, then two, each stone slick as memory. Hunger complains and I chew bark too bitter to disguise. Second joke muttered through clenched teeth. 5-star restaurant tonight. Entree of panic with sides of wet socks. And the river hurls laughter in foam. Midway across I pause because on the far bank I see a cluster of posts planted deep, each bearing a talisman flapping in spray, paper charms soggy but still clinging. And I whisper aloud a recognition. Scholars still debate whether such riverside shrines marked safe crossings or memorials to the drowned, and here both meanings cling like water to skin. A slip jolts my ankle and I catch myself on the fox mask, its edge digging into my palm, balance restored, and I murmur gratitude before continuing, each step a negotiation with the current. At last I climb the opposite bank, soaked to the knees, lungs burning, and bow once more because survival itself feels like ritual. Beyond the bank, the path threads through willows whose branches sweep low. Combing my hair with wet fingers, and at their base I find a stone trough where water pools calm, fed by the same river but stilled into mirror. I lean over and see my reflection doubled with the fox masks, one face human, one sly, and I whisper aloud that both have crossed together. Third joke slips out with weary grin. If reflections charged rent, I would already owe 2 months. And the mirror water shivers like it gets the joke. Past the willows the ground lifts again into a rise where the sound of the river fades, replaced by a stillness that tastes of iron. And in the distance I glimpse a structure rising. Tall pillars, roof slanted, banners torn but hanging, promising the next question will be asked not by water but by walls that have remembered too much. The rise carries me toward the structure until its shape hardens against the sky, tall pillars leaning like exhausted guards, roof warped but intact enough to throw shadow, banners torn into ribbons but still clinging stubbornly. I slow my steps because the air here tastes metallic, a hint of rust or blood or memory too old to tell apart. The fox mask grows warm against my chest as though bracing me for ceremony. First joke whispered to loosen the weight in my shoulders. If this is the forest's idea of a hotel, the welcome mat needs serious work, and the silence responds with a groan of timber. At the threshold I bow because walls demand courtesy even when broken, and step inside where dust swirls in shafts of pale light, floorboards sagging but not surrendering. In the center stands a raised platform, once an altar or dais, now cracked down its middle, and atop it rests a row of small boxes, lacquer chipped but gleaming faintly through grime. I approach and recognize the steady fact that temples often preserved relics or documents in such chests, storing sutras, charms, or local records, sometimes sealed against fire with clay linings. My hand hesitates above the nearest lid, and a quirky detail tumbles into memory. Some Edo-era shrines hid fortune slips inside offering boxes, letting fate be drawn by chance. A mix of prayer and gambling, and I wonder if these boxes whisper dice rolls of history. I lift one lid carefully. Inside lies ash and fragments of bone-white tablets carved faintly with kanji. Names I cannot fully read, but still names. And I bow to them, whispering thanks for standing watch even in fragments. Hunger gnaws, but I swallow it. Second joke muttered with a cracked smile. If I start eating offerings, I will be banned from every afterlife cafeteria, and the dust shifts in a reluctant chuckle. I replace the lid gently and turn to see that the walls are inscribed too. Ink faded but still visible in lines of calligraphy, sutras running shoulder to shoulder, their repetition meant to ward misfortune. Scholars still debate whether such wall sutras were prayers meant for the living or the dead, whether they turned the hall into a fortress of words or a bridge of memory, and here both possibilities weigh the air until breathing feels ceremonial. In the corner, I notice a drum smaller than the one I struck by firelight. Its skin torn but its frame intact, and beside it rests a mallet splintered to half its length. I strike once, soft, and the sound is hollow yet determined, and in answer a bird trapped in the rafters flutters free, streaking out into daylight. I bow again because even accident can be liberation. Third joke whispered with tired breath. If that bird files a complaint about my drumming, I will blame the mask, and the roof creaks as if approving the scapegoat. I step back outside into light sharper than before, pillars framing the sky, and see beyond the rise another slope descending into mist, where faint silhouettes of torches flicker though no one holds them. And I know the next question will not wait in relics but burn openly on the path ahead. Mist curls down the slope like a shawl thrown carelessly by the sky, swallowing edges until the path becomes a suggestion under my feet. I grip the fox mask in one hand because its warmth feels like a compass. First joke muttered to keep the fog from declaring itself king. If this is a welcome party, someone forgot the hors d'oeuvres, and the silence responds with a drip of moisture onto my nose. As I descend, shapes emerge, faint torches planted upright along the trail, their flames unheld yet steady, flickering without fuel, each one bowing slightly as though acknowledging my arrival. I bow back because courtesy works both ways, and I anchor myself with a fact. In pilgrimage routes of the Edo era, villagers sometimes lined the path with lanterns during festivals to guide travelers safely at night. Small fires becoming constellations on Earth. And though these torches have no keepers, the intention still feels familiar. A quirky thought interrupts with a grin. That in some records, pranksters snuck out to rearrange festival lanterns into crude shapes, turning sacred paths into jokes under moonlight. And I laugh softly at the idea, imagining these flames smirking at me from the mist. Hunger gnaws sharper now, stomach folding in on itself. And I chew the last root in my pouch. Second joke grumbled while swallowing splinters. Dinner tonight is air seasoned with despair, chef's kiss optional, and the mist swirls as though exhaling. Laughter. The torches lead me into a hollow where the ground flattens into a stone courtyard. Slick with moss, at its center a raised plinth bearing a statue half eroded by rain. Figure ambiguous, warrior, monk, or trickster, its face erased, only its posture suggesting defiance. I bow because absence still demands respect, and whisper aloud the story of the ruined hall with sutras on its walls, how prayers guarded names carved into ash, and the statue leans in silence as if receiving the message. Scholars still debate whether such anonymous statues were intentional, meant to represent every pilgrim, or simply victims of erosion, and the debate feels alive here where identity and loss hold equal weight. A faint sound interrupts, rhythmic and hollow, the clack-clack of Hayashiji echoing through mist, but slower this time, almost mournful, as though the forest has shifted meter. I follow it past the courtyard to where the torches gather in a tighter ring, their flames trembling in wind that does not exist, and in the center lies a shallow pool reflecting fire and fog together. I kneel at its edge and see not my face but the fox mask doubled in the reflection, its eyes glowing faintly, and I whisper thanks, promising not to abandon the stories I have gathered. Third joke escapes softly. If reflections keep multiplying, I will need to start charging rent, and the water ripples like it can't decide whether to smile or glare. Beyond the pool, the mist parts slightly to reveal stone steps rising into darkness, each step slick with moss, inviting and ominous. And I know the next question waits not in fire or reflection but higher, carved into the climb itself, demanding I answer with every breath I drag upward. The steps accept me one careful foot at a time, slick with moss and the memory of 1,000 tired calves. Breath climbing ahead of me like a scout that refuses to report back. I keep the fox mask pressed to my chest because balance still feels like etiquette, and the dark around the staircase behaves like a host waiting to see if I will track mud onto the tatami. First joke whispered to stop the hush from grating me too harshly. If there is a dress code, I hope soaked and stubborn qualifies, and a bead of condensation slides off the handrail in what I choose to interpret as approval. The rise grows steeper until the steps flatten on a landing where 2 stone dogs sit. Not foxes for once. Mouths carved in the traditional A and un, the open and the closed syllable that bookend. Breath. I bow between them and remember a plain fact to ground myself, that shrine guardians often come in such pairs to mark beginning and end, the alphabet of prayer in 2 sculptures. And the thought steadies my knees enough to keep going. The stair resumes in tighter flights, a spine inside the mountain, and soon a sound joins me from above, low and hollow, a flute with a throat, the kind of note that hangs like fog. And I realize with a small ache of recognition that it is a shakuhachi played in the Kamuso way, the breathy meditation of basket-hatted monks who wandered Edo streets. I mouth another anchor to keep pace, that the Fuke sect used such flute practice as a spiritual discipline before Meiji banned the order in 1871, and that to this day scholars still debate whether some Kamuso doubled as informants for authorities or whether later writers draped espionage over music because mystery sells. The argument pleases the darkness the way tea pleases the tongue, warm even when you can't see the cup. The landing above opens into a chamber without walls, just 4 posts and a roof. Wind threading through like a polite guest, and a single figure sits cross-legged near the far edge, hat of reeds pulled low, flute angled to lip, the notes rising then dissolving as if the air itself were shy. I do not step closer, I bow instead, and the figure acknowledges with a pause in the melody that counts as a nod. Hunger picks this elegant moment to remind me I am mortal. So I chew a curl of bark and mutter second joke through splinters. Live music, no cover charge, terrible concessions. The wind feathers the ends of my hair like a shrug. Beside the player a tray rests with 2 little censers, thin smoke smelling faintly of aloes wood and clove, and a quirky memory floats up from some book I dog-eared years ago, that samurai families once played incense games, kodo, testing noses on subtle blends the way courtiers tested poetry, scent as a map and a duel. And I smile because even discipline wants its pleasures. The smoke here is humble country recipe, but it insists on being noticed, a teaching that attention is a meal when you have none. The figure sets the flute down and taps a wooden clapper in a measured pattern. Clack, breath, clack, breath. An echo of the hayashiji I have been carrying in my chest for nights. And I understand the cue without needing language. Walk between beats. I stand, count 5, step, pause, step. The floor turns to stone again and the roof lowers until I have to bow to proceed, which feels righteous in a petty way because now my spine can be devout on purpose. The corridor spills me into a terrace cut from the mountain's shoulder, a long balcony over open air, dawn nowhere and yet the sky lighter than before. And at its end a bell hangs from a beam, not huge, just heavy with intent, rope wrapped in rice straw still soft enough to feel like skin. I bow and ring once. The note rolls down the ravine and back, wearing a coat of echo. And in that tide I set another anchor to keep from drifting. That temple bells in Edo marked the hours under the old system of unequal time, their tones calibrating neighborhoods before the standardized clocks arrived, and that a city's pulse once rode on bronze. The answer to the bell is not silence but movement. Along the parapet squat a line of little wooden tablets. Emma, their faces stained with weather, pictures of horses and waves, and on one very confident board, a plump gourd with a smiling face, petitions drawn then left to fade. I brush one gently and think about how wishes survive there. Owners with an embarrassing tenacity. Scholars still debate whether the wild growth of such folk practices in the late Edo era represented a democratization of devotion or mere desperation dressed in paint. And the tablets refuse to pick a side, which is the most honest thing wood can do. A ladder of roots dives from the terrace into a cedar grove so dense the air feels padded. I take it down into breath that tastes green and wet and vaguely medicinal. And at the grove's center rests a shallow stone like a sleeping turtle, carved in a grid of hexagons with a crack through its back, the twin of the tortoise-shell table I met by the stream. Only older, sulking under lichen. I place the small child-sized fox mask I found earlier on one hexagon and tell the grove a story, the drum ring and the flames that obeyed rhythm. The river that demanded poems instead of tickets. The woman in the valley whose grip redirected my heroism into usefulness. And the cedars listen the way old people listen, with patience sharpened into kindness. A stir behind me, the Camuso has followed without footfall, hat lowered, hands empty now, and stands at the edge of the grove like punctuation. So I try a question aloud. Soft, because these players enjoy ambiguity, what is the last question? And in reply the monk lifts a sleeve to reveal a length of rope tied in neat knots at measured intervals, an old hour counter, and holds it up next to the little fox mask. And I understand too quickly for comfort, the last question is time versus promise, how long a person will keep carrying what they said they would carry. I do not pretend to have the right answer. I do the respectful thing and count the knots while breathing slow. Glad for the Ronin's cheap arithmetic lesson on the ridge nights ago. My feet urge me forward, and the path obeys, turning to stairs again that climb into a mouth of light that cannot be sky, because it tastes metallic. The ceiling lowers till it brushes my hair and then opens, suddenly, onto a platform cut like a stage, ringed by torches that do not burn. Only remember, and beyond them a black torii framed against the white of clouds below. The same lacquered night gate from the cave mirrors, but now painted across the morning. I whisper third joke because moments like this will eat you if you do not season them. If the universe expects an entrance fee, I have only puns and stubbornness, and the torii is kind enough to not fine me for it. Between the posts stands a stand, a lectern made of joined cedar. Boards, simple to the point of severity, and on it a bound book waits, covers oiled, corners cracked, the title brushed on with the efficient arrogance of bureaucracy, Register of Passages. I have seen ledgers in a buried hill and wanted to steal them back from dirt. I have seen prayer boards pretending to be receipts, but this is neither, only a thick stack of blank pages that smell faintly of soot and rain. A brush rests in a groove with the tip still wet, which is both impossible and exactly correct for this forest's sense of humor. I do not ask permission because the bell already asked for me. I lift the brush, look at the empty book, and feel my name pawing at the door of my mouth like a cat that knows it should not be outside. The Ronin's instruction rising like a small stern ghost, trade a story. Not a name, so I write a sentence instead. The duel that ended with a bow was the sharpest cut this place taught me. And the page drinks it up like soup, the wet line drying into a sheen that looks, for a slip of a second, like a road across a field. I set the brush down and the book closes itself with a sigh, polite but unapologetic, and the wind steps forward to usher me through the black gate into a clearing no larger than a tea room, white gravel raked into steady waves. A single stone in the center with a crack like a horizon. And I know this is where the question is not asked verbally but with arrangement. Can you stop long enough to let the room work on you? I kneel on the gravel without rearranging a single stripe, set both masks, mine and the child's, on my thighs, and breathe until my ribs stop auditioning for percussion. A historical anchor returns to give my lungs something tidy to hold. That in the long Tokugawa peace many warriors retired their swords to practice arts. Ink, tea, scent, garden, turning violence inward into skill, and historians still debate whether that turn raised civility or just disguised coercion under aesthetics. But my body, knee-deep in gravel obedience, decides that tonight the debate can rest. The room has asked for stillness and I have paid in breath. When I finally rise, the camuso is gone. The rope with knots draped over the black lintel like a sleeping snake. And on the central stone lies a single umebashi, shriveled and bright. A sour gift or a dare? I take it because sour wakes memory, and because I am still counting. I tuck both masks away, bow to the gate, and step beyond, where the path begins to slope downward not into gloom but into a light that feels earned rather than found. A bright that belongs to late afternoon, and somewhere below, faint as a rumor I intend to make true. I hear a bell rung not by ghosts but by a hand that has done other work since sunrise. The downward slope unfolds like a page I did not realize was waiting, gravel giving way to soil soft with pine. Needles, each step cushioned as if the forest itself wants me quiet. I keep the fox mask against my hip because carrying it openly feels like part of the pact now. First joke whispered so the hush won't mistake me for obedient. If this counts as stealth training, someone owes me a certificate. And a crow coughs overhead in what I take as sarcastic applause. The path bends toward a low valley where smoke drifts thin as thread, not acrid but fragrant, carrying the sweet tang of chestnut wood, and hunger perks up with something sharper than complaint. A fact steadies my pace in Edo villages. Smoke rising from controlled fires often signaled seasonal tasks. Burning fields for planting, smoking fish for preservation, or preparing charcoal for trade, and those pillars of scent marked labor more than leisure. As I near the valley, I see mounds of earth, shaped into domes, vents puffing with controlled breath, charcoal kills, primitive yet deliberate, and though no hands tend them now, their heat lingers. A quirky detail presses in. That charcoal makers once lived on the margins of society, considered half outcasts because their trade blackened both skin and reputation, yet samurai and merchants alike depended on their fuel, and I grin because power always owes debt to the sooty. Handed. I crouch by one kiln and place a palm above the vent, warmth seeping like memory, and I whisper the story of the torii and the ledger of blank pages, how I wrote a sentence instead of my name, and the kiln exhales as though filing it away. Hunger refuses subtlety, so I gnaw bark with a grimace. Second joke grumbled through splinters. Gourmet review. Smoke 10 out of 10. Flavor -3. And the kiln cracks faintly like it. Wanted to laugh but remembered it was stone. At the far side of the clearing lies a wooden rack half collapsed. bundles of sticks stacked as though waiting for trade. And tucked among them I find a single tablet etched with lines like a calendar, strokes crossing days into clusters. Scholars still debate whether such tally marks were kept for labor counts, lunar cycles, or debts, and here in the company of kills. The uncertainty weighs heavier. Was this the ledger of fire or of time? I carry the tablet to a stump and bow before setting it down, then continue along the valley until the trees thicken again. The air shifts cooler, the soil darker, and soon the sound of water returns. Not the rage of a river, but the steadier wash of a wide stream gliding over pebbles, clear enough to show darting fish. I kneel at its edge, cup water to lips, and for the first time in many nights the taste is kind, cold, metallic, alive. Third joke slips out with relief. Finally, a drink that does not taste like tree bark. Michelin can keep its stars. I will take this river. And the water wrinkles like it knows how funny thirst makes people. Across the stream stands a bridge of rope and planks sagging with age, each step promising both passage and fall. I bow before it because even danger deserves respect, and step forward, the fox mask pressed to my chest as though it too holds its breath, and on the far side, through the swaying ropes, I glimpse lanterns flickering low among trees, promising that the next question waits not in smoke or stone but in light borrowed from night itself. The bridge sways with every step, ropes creaking like tired elders, planks bowing as though embarrassed by their own age. I keep the fox mask pressed to my chest because balance here feels like shared responsibility. First joke whispered to keep the fear from narrating itself too loudly. If I fall, at least the splash will be dramatic. And the stream below flickers silver in approval. Halfway across the lanterns ahead sharpen into sight. Their glow steady but low, perched not on posts but dangling from branches like fruit grown, of fire, each one swaying gently as if nodding. I bow once my feet find solid ground, because even borrowed light deserves gratitude. A fact steadies my steps during festivals in the Edo period. Villagers often hung lanterns from trees to mark sacred zones or protect gatherings, believing their glow drew benevolent spirits and confused the darker ones. Here the lanterns form a corridor of wavering orange, guiding me deeper into the grove. A quirky detail rises from memory, that pranksters once snuck charms or jokes inside festival lanterns, letting them burn until revealed as ash punched messages. Proof that reverence always makes room for mischief, and I smile despite the chill, wondering what these flames might be hiding. Hunger stirs again, sour and stubborn, so I chew a scrap of bark until my jaw aches. Second joke muttered while forcing it down. Tonight's delicacy is disappointment flambé, lightly torched for aroma, and one lantern flickers as if choking back laughter. The corridor empties into a clearing where the lanterns arrange themselves in a wide circle overhead, casting a pool of light on a raised platform made of rough wood. Upon it sits a low table scattered with objects, a half-burned candle, a brush without ink, coins rusted green, and in the center a mask larger than any I have seen, carved with sharp teeth and hollow eyes, its grin so wide it threatens to split the wood beneath. I bow but do not touch, whispering instead the story of the charcoal kills, how fire marked both survival and exile, and the mask listens without blinking, silence thicker than bark. Scholars still debate whether such grotesque masks were protective talismans or theatrical props, whether they were meant to frighten spirits or simply to teach fear to mortals, and standing here under its gaze I feel both explanations thread into one. A low breeze passes, tugging at the lanterns until their flames lean inward, casting my shadow across the mask like a fitting it had been waiting for, and I shiver but hold still. Third joke slips out with cracked lips. If this thing tries to eat me, I will at least save it. Dental fees, and the mask seems to grin wider without moving. I step carefully away from the platform, bow again, and leave the circle of lanterns, the glow thinning behind me until only darkness remains. Ahead, the trees open to reveal a slope climbing toward a silhouette unmistakable against the pale sky, a fortress wall, jagged but standing, its gate ajar as though daring me. The air tastes of iron and dust, and I know the next question waits not in symbols or light but in stone walls that once divided safety from ruin, asking whether survival has earned me entry. The fortress wall rises like a final breath the earth held too long, stones blackened and cracked yet still stacked with stubborn geometry, its gate tilted on ruined hinges but open enough to beckon. I press the fox mask to my face because crossing this threshold feels like ceremony. First joke whispered so the walls do not mistake me for too humble. If the doorman's on break, I hope they validate parking. And the silence inside answers with a slow groan as timber shifts under the weight of memory. The courtyard beyond is wide, gravel drowned in weeds. Yet the layout is clear, barracks to one side collapsed into ribs of charred beams, a watchtower leaning like a drunk monk, and at the far end a hall still intact, its roof sloping with dignity despite scars. I bow before entering and recall a grounding fact: castles and fortresses in the late Sengoku and early Edo periods were more than war machines. They were administrative hearts, repositories of authority and fear, their walls both defense and declaration. Inside the hall dust hangs thick, light slanting through holes in the roof, illuminating murals barely surviving, painted battles. Dragons faded to shadows, processions of courtiers whose eyes have melted into streaks. And in the center of the floor lies a circle of ash not from candles but from a pyre, its edges carefully ringed with stones. A quirky memory flickers that in some daimyo castles, defeated enemies were cremated within the walls not as honor but as containment, ensuring restless spirits served as warning more than legend. And the thought sets my stomach on edge. Hunger claws anyway, so I chew the last shred of bark until splinters numb my tongue. Second joke grumbled against the taste. Final feast of champions, bark soufflé with dust glaze, Michelin would faint, and the rafters creak like reluctant laughter. At the far wall rests a throne-sized chair carved from cedar, back split but seat intact, and upon it lies a ledger bound in leather. Thicker than any I have seen, its clasp broken, its pages fanned slightly as though breathing. I bow before touching, then open to the middle, where the writing shifts from orderly records into frantic brushstrokes, lines overlapping, ink splattered like rain, words of prophecy or panic. Scholars still debate whether such apocalyptic writings in late medieval Japan were genuine visions, political allegories, or symptoms of collapse, and the ambiguity thrums here, each page vibrating between truth and madness. I close the ledger gently and lay the fox mask upon it for a breath, whispering aloud that I have carried stories instead of answers, and that weight has shaped me into something still standing. The hall holds the words without comment, then exhales as a gust that scatters ash upward, the pyre's remains rising like gray birds, before settling again. Third joke slips through the heaviness. If housekeeping charges me for that mess, I am leaving a bad review, and the wind stills as if smiling. I step back outside into the courtyard where the mist has thinned, revealing sky pale with dawn, and from the gate I look once more at the walls, bowed but unbroken, and bow myself, a final courtesy to stones that survived longer than their keepers. The path beyond slopes downward, softer now, lined with grass instead of weeds, the air easier in my lungs. Each step feels like a wind down, the forest releasing its grip. Torches, cairns, masks, and ledgers dissolving into memory rather than shadow. My stride slows naturally, sentences lengthening in my head the way dusk stretches daylight, and I let them, because survival has earned softness. The trees thin until only open sky remains. Vast and safe, Horizon brushed with light that promises morning has arrived at last. I breathe deeply, letting silence settle not as threat but as blanket, and imagine whispering to those still, listening stones, reeds, flames, ash, that I am done carrying questions tonight. The gravel path fades into earth, then grass, then nothing, and I sit, letting the fox mask rest in my lap, listening to the hum of wind like a lullaby. This ending does not close so much as it leans back, asking me to rest, asking you to rest, because we have walked far enough to deserve stillness. Sleep waits gently, soft as moss, and I let it come, voice thinning to a whisper, wishing that the echoes of this forest cradle you the way its branches once cradled me, safe and unbroken.